Dear students, welcome to this lecture. Today, my topic for deliberation is Development Administration in Global South. The objectives for this lecture are to explore the concept of development administration, to explore the concept of Global South, to understand the evolution of development administration in Global South, to understand the implications of development administration in Global South. Before going into the details, let's have a brief introduction of this topic. The traditional approach towards administration has been limited in its scope and premise, the core of which was strict adherence to laid down rules and hierarchy. In essence, it has limited the role of administration to that of a firefighter or overseer of law and order in the comfort of laid down principles. While nothing is wrong in this approach if the society is utopian, but in a more practical sense, it causes problems. Since bureaucracy is that arm of the government which is responsible for executing plans and allocating resources at the grassroots level, it is imperative that they take some risks and be innovative in approach, especially more so when the nation is a developing one. Development administration is about projects, programs, policies, and ideas which are focused at development of a nation with the point of view of socio-economic and socio-political development of society in general, carried out by talented and skilled bureaucrats. The term development administration came into use in the 1950s to represent those aspects of public administration and those changes in public administration which are needed to carry out policies, projects, programs to improve social and economic conditions. During a period of 15 years following the World War II, in 1945, colony after colony threw off the imperial yoke. Country after country achieved independence and political autonomy. This new status gave promise of freedom and liberty and self-determination in political systems of representative democracy. It gave hope of greater individual freedom and equality of treatment in the society. And independence created hopes of higher national and per capita income, a rapid rise in standards of living, and an increase in individual opportunity. Even in countries which had not been colonies but had been administered by some other form of authoritarian government, this was a generation of rising and insistent expectations pressing for rapid political, social, and economic change. New governments and their bureaucracies, their administrative agencies and processes were expected to give reality to these anticipated fruits of freedom and liberty. These new functions, these demands upon the administration were not only enormous in size and weight, they were novel and complex in character. Let's have a brief introduction about Global South. Global South refers to countries often characterized as developing, less developed, or underdeveloped, primarily located in Africa, Asia, Latin America. These nations typically experience higher levels of poverty, income inequality, and challenging living conditions compared to the wealthier nations of Global North. The Global North is richer nations that are located mostly in North America and Europe, with some additions in Oceania and elsewhere. The term Global South was first coined in 1969 by political activist Carl Oglesby. It gained momentum after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, which marked the end of Second World. Previously, developing nations were commonly referred to as the Third World, a term coined by Alfred Soe in 1952. However, this term became associated with poverty, instability, and negative stereotypes propagated by Western media. As a result, the term Global South emerged as a more neutral alternative. The term Global South does not have a strict geographical definition. It signifies a combination of political, geopolitical, and economic similarities among nations. Many countries in the Global South have a history of imperialism and colonial rule, particularly evident in African countries. This history has shaped their perspective on the relationship between the global center and periphery within the global political economy. Now, let us talk about development administration in Global South. A critical difficulty in discussing the status of development administration in developing countries is the phenomenal heterogeneity in the environmental context, structures, behavioral patterns, and outputs of the administrative system of these countries. There are prominent variations in the levels of political, economic, social, cultural, and technological development in the so-called developing nations that cover geographically a major part of the Global South. Most nations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America will fall in this category. Exceptions are, however, too obvious to be ignored. While Japan has joined the big league of developed nations, South Korea is not too behind. But most notably, the People's Republic of China is leaping towards the status of superpower, and the Asian tigers are not comfortable in the company of Nepal, Sri Lanka, or Bangladesh. Thus, the variations in their level of socio-economic development create categories within the broader category of developing nations. Then there are countries such as North Korea, Cuba, and Vietnam, which still value certain attributes of communism, while there are nations like India, Philippines that have honored the tenets of parliamentary democracy. Now, let's talk about diversity in political regimes. Assuming that regimes sharing common structural and behavioral characteristics are likely to approach the task of nation building and socio-economic transformation in similar ways. Milton Asman has designated more than 3 decades ago 5 political regimes in developing nations: conservative oligarchies, authoritarian military reformers, competitive interest-oriented party system, dominant past party system, and communist totalitarian status. Fan Sood, basing this typology on the criterion of the relationship of bureaucracies to the flow of political authority, distinguished 5 different political systems in the developing world: ruler-dominated bureaucracies, military-dominated bureaucracies, ruling bureaucracies, representative bureaucracies, and party-state bureaucracies. Farrell Haddy further explored the nuances of the above categories and came up with a 6-fold classification: traditional autocratic systems, bureaucratic elite systems, civil and military, polyarchal competitive systems, dominant party semi-competitive system, dominant party mobilization system, and communist totalitarian system. Haddy maintains that despite the recent shift in the political arrangements in a few developing nations, his classification would hold true even today. There does not seem to be any dispute about any specific classification of developing countries, for they mostly deal with the nature of power and its distribution among the various organs of the political systems, and more eminently its bureaucratic system. The consensus remains that the nature of political system influences the character and efficacy of development administration functioning in a country. Now, let us talk about bureaucratic polity. Most Western scholars seem to believe that in the developing world, even the political regimes dominated by one party, one ruler, or a multi-party system, bureaucracy controls the crucial levers of power. Bureaucracy, by virtue of its educational background, competence, experience, and expertise, has an edge over the subsystems, for it enjoys power that is far in excess of what it should deserve in a legal, rational, authority system. When major policies and decisions relating to a regulatory or development administration bear the stamp of bureaucratic expertise or discretion, it would be a trait what Riggs calls a bureaucratic polity. Riggs maintains that in a large majority of developing countries, one notices the work of a bureaucratic polity as against a party-run polity. Issue of ideology apart, a bureaucratic polity is likely to use the power of governance to its own advantage, leading to the dysfunctionalities of self-centeredness and personal aggrandizement. These negative attitudes, in turn, would prove inimical to the process of development. As a corollary to this assumption regarding the relationship between the bureaucratic power and socio-economic development, Riggs and other ideology-oriented scholars seem to suggest that hastening of the development process in developing countries should be preceded by creating balance in the polity and thus reducing the power of bureaucracy. This approach is a direct legacy of the Western concept of checks and balances and balance of power, and exhibits distrust in bureaucracy. Only a few scholars, such as Ralph Brabanti, question the wisdom of this approach and suggest that sometimes bureaucracy alone becomes the prime mover of the development process, and a preconceived notion about its attitude towards power and development should not be adopted. There is a need to take a broader ecological approach and judge the role and effectiveness of bureaucracy in a most rational and objective manner. Dear students, now let us discuss about the varying levels of economic development. Heterogeneity is the key characteristic of the level of economic development in developing countries. The World Bank reports point out massive variation in the levels of national income, per capita income, industrial development, agricultural growth, etc. in these nations. To a great extent, the level of an economic development and the level of equity in the distribution of economic resources influences the nature of development administration in developing countries. Nations which decide to move with the times in the matter of globalization and liberalization of their economies with the help of foreign assistance and investment moved a lot faster on the road to economic development than did the others, which took initiative in this regard belatedly and haltingly. Now, let us talk about differing levels of human development. As the recent Human Development Report released by United Nations Development Programme on 24 July 2002 shows, there is a striking dissimilarity among developing nations in matter of human development. While India, Pakistan and Bangladesh are low in Human Development Index, there are many other nations of the third world that enjoy a higher place in this realm. For example, Sri Lanka. A lower index rate in the human development is the cause as well as consequence of an unsatisfactory development administration. Not that administrative or managerial factors are the sole causative factors for low HDI. Yet the fact remains that the efficacy or its lack of governance system cannot be considered as a peripheral factor in inducing or impeding human development. The developing world, characterized by a conspicuous heterogeneity in its political, economic, social, and cultural system, also finds itself in the company of variegated administrative systems. Wherever there is a common colonial heritage, as in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, certain commonalities do prevail in the administrative systems, such as secretariat administration, district administration, and the revenue administration. Yet, all nations have also evolved their indigenous patterns that distinguish them from the rest of the developing world. In spite of the marked variations in the structure and behavioral pattern in the bureaucratic systems, there do remain perceptible common patterns of administrative system devoted to development administration. It should nevertheless be accepted that the dichotomy between development and non-development administration does not exist in a discernible manner, and therefore the administrative characteristics in developing countries would apply to developmental as well as non-developmental settings, though in varying proportions. Now, let's have a look on the mixed values. Most developing nations exhibit values in development administration that are a blend of the legacy of the colonial past and the modernizing values adopted after independence. As yet, bureaucrats show in the behavior the traits of paternalism, elitism, aloofness, and authoritarianism. A new pattern of values like empathy, sympathy, and extension motivation are superimposed on the old value set. Structurally, there are no development bureaucracies as such, and in actual behavior, generalist bureaucrats find themselves being shuffled between and regulatory and development positions. Their attitude and orientation remain the same in both types of positions, and the extra sensitivity or creativity that's expected in a development administrative system are found missing in bureaucrats. Little wonder development administration is conducted on the lines of its hoarier companion, non-development administration. Efforts need to be made, and some have already been made, to inculcate among administrators attributes that can make them more positive to the requirements of development. Training can help in this respect, but it is overburdened with the responsibilities for improving knowledge and skills rather than changing attitudes. Now, let us discuss significant role in developmental policy making. Senior administrators in developing countries have been involved in the formulation of crucial policies in the realms of education, health, agriculture, irrigation, industries, housing, women and child development, and other associated developmental areas. They have not only performed advisory role in preparing progressive legislations and policies, but have also come out with their own innovative ideas and initiatives in almost all areas of social concern. One major problem in this sphere has been a multiplicity of policies and a lack of synthesis among them. Every new political regime or chief executive generally rejects the policies of predecessors and frames new policies and programs, and administrators have only to follow the directions of their political masters. Even in the changed situations, their role and importance in policy making remain crucial to the success of development administration. Now, let us talk about planning system. All developing nations have adopted planning as the key instrument of development administration. Distinct organizations for plan formulation and evaluation have been set up at the federal, state, district, and local levels in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and other developing nations. The approach to socio-economic development is enshrined in plan documents, and the whole state machinery is expected to cooperate with the national planning body to implement faithfully the national plans. Only recently, with the advent of liberalization and privatization, the role of government seems to have been redefined. There is stress on downsizing of the government and the transfer of development functions to the private sector. This has reduced the scope for detailed planning, and instead one notices a coexistence of the traditional government planning and the emergent indicative planning. For example, even the Planning Commission reports of the Government of India in the early 90s referred to the utility of indicative planning. For the foreseeable future, the coexistence of detailed, sectoral, and indicative planning is most likely to remain. Now, let us talk about massive public sector and the emerging de-emphasis on it. Most developing nations have adopted a mixed economy model and have expanded the role of the state as an instrument of socio-economic development. The state entered the economic system as an entrepreneur, promoter, regulator, and facilitator. Massive expansion of public sector helped in developing a strong infrastructure for development and in providing essential social services to the less privileged sections of society. However, the bureaucratic styles of functioning made their progress slow and halting. Huge investments did not produce satisfactory results, and with the blowing fresh winds of disinvestment and privatization, their size is being reduced in most developing nations. A new era of public-private partnership has dawned and has come to stay. Now, let us talk about people-centered development. In all developing nations, there has been a notable stress on promoting decentralized governance for development. At the district, state, town, block, village levels, decentralized institutions of governance have been given the responsibility for managing development programs. In the case of India, even the Constitution has been amended through the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts. Functions and powers have been devolved to decentralized institutions in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka as well. The objective is to make the development administrative system more responsive. Moreover, cooperative organizations, non-government organizations, and voluntary agencies are being promoted to take over functions aimed at the development of specific areas and groups. The notion of administrative state is being modified. Now, let us discuss about weak vigilance system. Despite getting low ratings from the Transparency International in terms of public integrity, administrative system in developing countries continue to suffer from the malaise of corruption. The vigilance machinery in these countries needs to be strengthened. Moreover, the legal and judicial systems need to be more effective in curbing bribery and unethical conduct in public life. Development administration can grow in an environment of probity and transparency. This would also require a change in the outlook of bureaucrats. Frederigus finds in developing countries a preference among bureaucrats for personal expediency as against public principled interest. This preference needs to be reversed through proper control mechanisms and training. Now let us discuss about administrative development. In all developing nations, a movement of administrative development has gained momentum. There has been a great stress on transforming the structures, processes, and behavioral patterns of the administrative system. This is what has been termed as administrative development, which focuses on enhancing the capabilities of the administrative systems to facilitate the achievement of progressive political, economic, and socio-cultural goals that it is expected and designed to achieve. Now, let's come to the conclusion of today's lecture. In today's lecture, we saw that developed nations are decades and in a few cases centuries ahead of developing nations. Yet, both of them have to evolve goal-oriented administrative systems. Depending on the political stability and the level of socio-economic development of a particular category of nations, the progressiveness of these goals will vary. And within the same category of nations, the goals to be achieved by their respective administrative systems will differ in nature and intensity. So dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding development administration in Global South. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. See you next time with a new topic. Till then, take care. Goodbye.